Okay, good afternoon. Thanks everybody for being here for our public meeting for the Monterey County Regional Conservation Investment Strategy. Just wanted to thank everybody for being able to make our meeting and wanted to introduce the team that we have here today. Helping with the presentation, we have Diana Edwards from AECOM, who is leading the consultant team, assisting with the development of the Monterey County RCIS. We also have Della Acosta from Rincon, who will be helping to moderate the meeting today. And just to let you know that we are recording the meeting so that we can post this to our website afterwards. So folks that weren't able to attend the meeting in person will be able to watch it and send in any comments that they may have. So just moving to the next slide, we just have a few Zoom etiquette slides to go over.
Hey everyone, I am Della Acosta with Rincon Consultants. I'm going to be the moderator for today's meeting. So I'm going to be helping manage incoming questions and comments and muting and unmuting people who would like to ask questions and comments when the time comes. So I'm going to cover some quick instructions for how you can do that so that everyone knows how to submit official comments for the record and also how to ask any questions that you might have about the presentation. As you probably noticed, we do have everyone's phones and lines on mute, and we will continue to do so throughout the presentation just to make sure that there's no background distractions while the presenters are speaking, but there will be opportunities for questions after the presentation. Any comments that you want to be part of the public record do have to be submitted in writing. So if you want a comment to be part of that written record, we are taking those through the Zoom chat feature. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, you can click on the chat button and type your comment out and submit it to the host, and we will include that as part of the public record. For any questions that are just for your own understanding of the project or clarification that don't need to be part of the public record, we'll be using the raise hand feature. So also at the bottom of the screen, you can click raise hand, and I will be taking note of who has their hand raised, and in the order you raise your hand, I will, when the time comes for the Q&A, I will unmute you. And so please pay attention to when you're unmuted, or if you don't speak, I will try to ping you that it's your turn to speak, and you can ask your question. If for whatever reason you don't have a working microphone, you can let me know through the chat window, messaging the host and asking your question, and I can ask your question for you. Just be aware it's a little harder to keep track of questions that way, so just be a little patient because things may get a little out of order if you submit questions through the chat rather than asking yourself. And that's about it. So if now that we've covered some of those basics, I'll let Mike and Diana handle the rest.
Great, thank you, Della. So just to get started, I know some of the folks on the meeting today have been with us throughout the development of the Monterey County RCIS, but there are some new folks that I see on the line. So I just wanted to start with an overview of just what is the Regional Conservation Investment Strategy. And this is a program that was established by Assembly Bill 2087, that was Levine in 2015. And it allows a public agency to create a strategy focused on conserving habitat in a manner that benefits species and provides resiliency to threats such as climate change. The interest in this for the Transportation Agency is that the conservation actions identified in the RCIS can then be used as the basis for mitigation credits. So particularly with our Measure X program, the Transportation Sales Tax Initiative that was approved in 2016, we have a number of projects that will likely in the future need will require habitat and species mitigation. So this process can help us to potentially streamline the permitting process and to deliver our transportation projects more efficiently. The RCIS program is managed by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, so all RCISs must be approved by CDFW, and then the mitigation credits pertain just to those that are issued by CDFW. But this program can be used by other state and federal regulatory agencies as long as it's consistent with their authorities. And we'll talk a little bit more later about how we work to include other regulatory agencies in our process to make sure that their feedback was incorporated and that we can potentially use this program as broadly as possible. RCISs are approved for an initial period of up to 10 years, and then there is the opportunity to renew after that 10 years is up. And as I mentioned, this is a relatively new program. There is only one approved RCIS in the state right now. That's the Santa Clara County RCIS. And there are 4 others that are currently in draft. And so we are hoping to be the 5th with the Monterey County Regional Conservation Investment Strategy. So as I mentioned, with the passage of Measure X, we included $5 million in that program to conduct advanced habitat mitigation for the regional transportation projects that are included in Measure X. The idea is to be able to set aside habitat or do other conservation work before transportation projects are ready for construction, and then receive mitigation credits for that conservation work. The benefits of this approach is that we can secure habitat when it's potentially less expensive, rather than waiting till when the project is actually ready to be constructed. And then habitat can also be preserved in a manner that maintains connectivity for different species rather than doing everything on a piecemeal basis, which is typically the approach that has historically happened. But the first step in this process is identifying the different vulnerable species and habitats that we have and determining what conservation actions are necessary to protect them. And that's exactly what the Monterey County RCIS seeks to do. So some examples of potential conservation actions that could be identified in the RCIS include wildlife crossings under state highways, such as the scenic State Route 68, that would preserve and improve habitat connectivity while reducing animal and vehicle conflict points. And the great thing about this is constructing culverts and wildlife crossings are things that previously were not necessarily eligible for mitigation credits, but through this program they are. We could also potentially look at restoring Santa Cruz long-toed salamander pond habitat for the State Route 156 project. We could also look at land acquisition of areas with high conservation values, and this also includes the preservation of working lands or agricultural lands. And again, that's another area where in the past we've had difficulty coming up with mitigation opportunities for our projects for working lands. But through this program, we might find some more efficiencies in doing so. So specifically, the Monterey County RCIS is seeking to accomplish the following objectives, and that's to conduct advanced planning for habitat conservation, identifying locations for habitat and agricultural mitigation for our transportation projects, and then just improve the resource agency approval process. So our effort is funded, as I mentioned, partially through Measure X. As I mentioned, there's $5 million in Measure X specifically to do habitat preservation and advanced mitigation. We were able to take a small portion of that, just over $90,000, and match that with a Caltrans adaptation planning grant that we received of just over $375,000. So very thankful for Caltrans to be our funding partner in this to help us with funding the development of this exciting program. And that also leads into the outreach and coordination that we've done in the development of the Monterey County RCIS. So to assist us with the development, TAMC convened a steering committee composed of Caltrans, both District 5 as well as headquarters, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, again, both regional and headquarters, and then the Nature Conservancy was also on our steering committee. Nature Conservancy has been a big proponent of RCISs statewide, so it was great to have them in the group to help us avoid some of the pitfalls that have cropped up with some of the other RCISs as they've moved along, and helped us to have a smooth process in the development. We also convened a broader stakeholder committee that included local conservation organizations such as the Elkhorn Slough Foundation and Big Sur Land Trust. We had other public agencies such as the Santa Cruz County Regional Transportation Commission. They are also in the process of developing their Santa Cruz County RCIS, so we wanted to stay in close coordination with them as well. We've had the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, and then also the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So just really a broad array of stakeholders have been participating throughout this process, and I believe have helped to us to develop a really strong draft Monterey County RCIS. And with that, I'll turn this over now to Diana Edwards to talk a little bit more in detail about the great work that they've been doing.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Diana Edwards. I am the project manager on the consultant side with AECOM. We've been supporting TAMC in developing the regional conservation investment strategy. So to kind of take you through where we've been and where we're going with this, we'll briefly talk about the timeline, then kind of dig into what's in the RCIS. Hopefully you've been along with us for most of the way, and if not, we'll give you a high level what's in there. It's hard to summarize a 300-page document in under an hour, but I'll do my best. So we first developed a draft outline. We did a regional setting report, which many of the folks on this call helped us review and give input, which was extremely helpful. We developed conservation goals and actions, which is the most recent piece that has gone out to stakeholders, and we received a lot of feedback, which was extremely helpful. And now we're in the process of finalizing this draft RCIS, which should be available for folks to take a look at soon. That will then go to CDFW as well, where we will have a public review process, and that will go into the final RCIS. We are all hoping to get this all done by the end of the year, barring any issues. So keep your eyes peeled for that. All right, next slide. So what is the Monterey County RCIS? Mike gave us a pretty good overview of kind of the purpose and need of it, but what it really is, it's a bold vision of future conservation within Monterey County, where conservation actions sustain and enhance ecological resources, biodiversity, ecological processes and functions, and promote resilience to climate change. So how did we get there? Next slide, thank you. We got there through going through some of these components that are required through the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. We developed a regional setting report, which we'll talk a little bit about, selected our focal and non-focal species. We did an analysis of stressors and pressures, which is very hard for me to say, so keep your eyes out for that, which included a climate vulnerability assessment. We developed those conservation actions, which I just talked about, and then developed a monitoring and management strategy, which kind of outlines what's required for folks who are interested in creating those mitigation credit agreements by implementing the conservation actions in the plan. So we'll talk a little bit about the regional setting. It is a plan that showed what is in Monterey County, and the boundary of the RCIS area is the Monterey County county boundaries. And we did that to kind of reduce jurisdictional issues. And also Monterey County is just so big and beautiful. We thought this might be a good place for us to just stop our boundaries on that. So this plan includes the natural setting, and so here you'll see this map. It shows the land cover types in Monterey County, so extremely variable, lots of different things here, lots of good places for conservation. We also looked at what is already built and what's planned here in Monterey County, and where are there existing linkages and connectivity that we can build upon for conservation into the future. So next we chose our focal species. We started with more than 200 species, which through a rigorous selection process got whittled down to 28 focal species. And focal species are these species that we created actions, goals, and priorities around, but there is also some additional things that have gone into our conservation strategy. We have 4 unique natural communities that are also part of the RCIS. Those are the California sycamore woodland, valley oak woodland, Monterey pine forest, and then as Mike mentioned, working lands, and that includes agriculture and grazing. We have 2 ecosystem functions, dune formation, which is very important on the Monterey Bay side. You see as you go through, I mean, it's called Sand City, very important function there, and habitat connectivity. And then of course we have 20 non-focal species, and these are species that are associated with our focal species. Either they share similar habitats, they have similar ecosystem functions, and so the conservation actions that, when implemented for the focal species, can also benefit these non-focal species. And our focal species generally represent sensitive habitats throughout Monterey County, or they represent regional connectivity. Some of our species are species that may require mitigation, but it's difficult to fulfill those mitigation requirements as it is right now. So those were included so that mitigation credit agreements could be created for those species to be able to fulfill those mitigation requirements into the future. So after choosing our focal species, we did an analysis of stressors and pressures, and that includes a climate change vulnerability assessment. So this image here is wildfire risk that we got from CAL FIRE, which is an important thing to look at when we're both looking at how habitats might change and also how that impacts the urban environment, and the transportation network, which obviously TAMC is very interested in. So some of the impacts of climate change that we looked at were drought, fire, and then of course flooding and sea level rise. We also looked at other stressors and pressures on our focal and non-focal species, including pollution, air and water quality, water management and use, urban development and farming, ranching. We looked at invasive species and also took a look at kind of one of the other big pressures and stressors on focal species, which is habitat fragmentation. So after we did all of this analysis, figuring out what are the threats to our species, we developed a set of conservation actions. And these conservation actions are developed as a direct response to those threats, to those climate change vulnerabilities. So in our conservation actions, we have created species profiles, and this is where I expect a lot of folks will be the most interested in what's in the RCIS. And we have developed these to kind of be their own standalone mini chapters on each species. We are calling them the baseball cards, because they kind of include all of the information that you might need to start to develop actions. Well, we've developed the actions, but start to implement the actions. And those include habitat models, which we pulled from publicly available sources like the U.S. Geological Survey, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the natural communities that we identified in the regional setting report. We pulled from some existing models that AECOM happened to have in the area, and we got some really good models from researchers, including the mountain lion. We have a really excellent model there, and then other publicly available distribution models. Our baseball cards also include ecological requirements for each of our species, the associated non-focal species, and a summary of the climate change vulnerability assessments for each of those species. We then have the priorities, goals, objectives, and actions for each of these species, also including a list of co-benefits that these actions may provide when they are implemented. And these co-benefits, like I said, they are additional benefits in addition to directly addressing the threats that we've identified. These are benefits that may, for example, improve habitat for other focal or non-focal species. They might improve water quality, support biodiversity, or provide climate change resilience. So an example of that might be looking at our kind of wildlife crossing actions. That obviously provides some habitat connectivity, and maybe we're talking about for mountain lion, but that's also going to provide habitat connectivity for other smaller and prey species and kind of get genetic flow across locations that maybe don't have it. So it's kind of these additional benefits that may happen. So some kind of example conservation actions, because like I said, it's hard to distill 300 pages into an hour-long presentation, but to kind of give a high-level overview of what this kind of looks like, is we have protection actions, and this is obtaining suitable or potentially suitable habitat to prevent further development or modification, or restoring, and that is taking unsuitable habitat into suitable conditions, informed by the species, biology, and ecology that you're trying to manage for. There's establishing habitat, that's creating new habitat practices or populations. And then there's acquisition. This is acquiring lands to prevent further development, to maybe do a restoration project on. And then of course managing, and this is ongoing active commitments to maintain suitable conditions for our species. So we have all of those for each of our species, kind of more on a species specific level. I'll just give you a high level overview of what these kind of actions would look like if you were going to implement some of these. So one of the final parts of the RCIS is an implementation and monitoring strategy. And this lays out the steps necessary to create a mitigation credit agreement and a plan for assessing progress. As Mike said before, the RCIS is good for a period of 10 years. And at the end of that 10 years, we want to know, how did we do? We have a bunch of goals and objectives. We want to know how well we did for that. And so this kind of gives the outline of what we're looking for, how we might assess that progress. So to get into what a mitigation credit agreement is, it is, like we've talked about before, it's an agreement between California Department of Fish and Wildlife and anyone, not just TAMC, not just Caltrans, it can be anyone. And these credits are created by implementing the actions that we detailed in the RCIS. These credit agreements have to be approved by California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they may be used as mitigation for state regulations like the California Environmental Quality Act, California Endangered Species Act, and then a lake and streambed alteration program. And I think there is hopefully going to be more opportunities for other mitigation to be able to be fulfilled using these. And I think that's an ongoing conversation. So kind of the last thing that we're doing is part of the Monterey County RCIS. It's not just this awesome, wonderful, beautiful, and I'm saying this because I wrote it, 300-page document, but we also have this companion website, which our partner Green Info Network has developed for us. And it's where we expect that most of you will probably end up going to first when looking at, what's in the RCIS, how can I find locations for the species that I'm interested in, or I know I'm going to have, impacts in this area, what species might be there, and you can go to our web portal and get that information. It is interactive, it's searchable. We have dynamic maps that you can take a look at. We'll have a geographically based click and draw functionality. And then you'll be able to do that, and you'll be able to pop up our list of species that are potentially in that area, click a little bit further and see what actions are associated with that species. And from there you can start to develop, like I said, your implementation plan by looking at the priorities and actions for each of these species. And we'll also have, if you're really interested in it, you can always go and click on the link and just read all 300 pages of the document we've created for you as well. If we have some time, maybe later, we can take a look through the web portal. It's not completely done. We don't want to be putting in a bunch of information that might change with the development of our drafts, but we have a few things that we can show folks as well. And so then what is next? I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but what's next is we are going to be taking the comments that we've received here, incorporating that into the draft, which we are going to be taking to the Transportation Agency of Monterey County Board in a month. They will approve it, and from there we will submit it to California Department of Fish and Wildlife. They'll go through and do a completeness check, which we're hoping will pass with flying colors, and then it will be posted as an administrative draft, again, available for public review. So I think with that, we can start our question and comment period.
Maybe just a reminder that if anyone has, oh, there we go. Okay, Catherine, you're unmuted.
Yes, my name is Catherine Ryman. I happen to be legal counsel for TAMC, but I am wondering, I just went onto the TAMC website. You talked about the web portal. Will there be is it on the TAMC website, or will there be a link from the TAMC website? Where will the public be able to obtain the document?
That's a great question. The web portal, because it's not 100% quite done yet, we don't have a public-facing place where you can check it out and click through it, but it will be hosted by TAMC when it is available.
Thank you.
Yeah, and all other documents that we've created to date are on the TAMC website under the Regional Conservation Investment Strategy kind of subheader. You'll be able to find everything that we've created to date on that as well, for anyone else who's maybe just catching up with us.
That's correct. If you go to tamcmonterey.org and then look under programs, you'll find the Regional Conservation Investment Strategy project page. And then, as Diana mentioned, the deliverables to date are posted there. The draft of the RCIS is going through an internal review at TAMC right now, and then we'll send out notice to everybody when that's available for their review as well. And that will also be posted to our website.
Thanks. Okay, and I see a hand from Kim Sanders. I think you're unmuted.
Hi, thank you for taking my raised hand. So I'm wondering if our comments, I just want to be sure that comments received based on your solicitation, I'm not sure when it was, but everyone provided comments in a spreadsheet a while back, that was all incorporated or considered rather in your draft.
Yes. Yeah, we received more than 180 different comments on the conservation strategy document, which is awesome. That's exactly what we wanted. Yeah, so because we had that spreadsheet, it was really easy for us to be able to go through, incorporate the comments that were appropriate. And so that will be, all of those comments have been considered. So when you see the draft, those will have already, kind of been thought about at that point.
Okay, great, thank you. And also, we support your fact that you have to, in order to get credits, the credits are available to those implementing conservation actions. And I believe that's what your slide said. And that we consider some of those conservation actions, as we said in our spreadsheet, to be removal of what were former permanent impacts, or rather, if there's going to be credits for impacts to water quality and the beneficial uses of water, and they're permanent, then we need some sort of removal of a permanent impact to make that a credit. I just want to be clear.
Yeah.
But otherwise, this is sounds like you've really done a lot of work, tons of work, and I'm excited to dig more into your details.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we have Andrew.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I joined a few minutes late, so I apologize if this was explained. I've heard in other RCIS programs, proposed programs, that temporary conservation easements might be a suitable conservation action. I was wondering if that is an option in the Monterey County RCIS, and if so, would that fall under like the preservation category or the land protection category of actions we're talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't specified anything about temporary easements. So that may be something that we have to dig a little bit deeper into with California Department of Fish and Wildlife and get back to you on that. Yeah, I'm not quite sure on that one, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay, no problem, thank you.
Sure. Okay. Anything else, Andrew? No, okay. And Fernanda, we have you next.
Hi, everyone. I'm new to this, so I would like if someone could share an example of how this RCIS could be implemented on a project. Like, I just want to know just or how it's been implemented already, or for a future scenario, what it would look like and how the project would benefit from this RCIS.
Sure. Because this program is so new, and like Mike mentioned at the beginning, there's only been one approved RCIS. So there's not a lot of like on the ground as built projects that we can reference. But there are, you know, I know that there's a kind of a handful of mitigation credit agreements that are in the works. One example that I can start to think of is kind of looking at maybe a wildlife crossing under Highway 17. I know there's some discussion there of being able to create this wildlife crossing and being able to receive mitigation credit agreements for that. You know, and that can be, and that, you know, benefits both reducing wildlife and human interactions on Highway 17. There could be other potential things that may go along with that project. You know, perhaps widening Highway 17 at the same time, something like that. This is just an example, but that's one example of something that might happen. And that's not in Monterey County, that's in Santa Clara County. But that's, you know, that's something that may be beneficial. Or if we look at, say, a TAMC project, say they want to widen 156, and they can, they know they're going to have California red-legged frog impacts, that they can acquire or enhance habitat somewhere, you know, nearby within the watershed, within a nearby watershed, and receive credit for that well before their project starts to be even requiring that mitigation. Right now, mitigation is usually required before the project gets started, and so we can have that in place long before that. Does that help answer your question?
Sorry, I was muted. So I think I understand. So is one of the purposes of this RCIS to have the mitigation ready so that if a project comes along, it'll be an approved mitigation already that can be applied to the project?
Potentially, that is one of the potential uses of the RCIS, is kind of gearing it towards, you know, those future mitigation needs. That's not the only reason that one might use an RCIS. We've also, you know, located priority locations within Monterey County that, say, a conservation organization didn't, you know, somebody didn't want to do all of the work to figure out where they're going to get the most bang for their buck. Say that, you know, Boy Scouts wanted to do a project. We've already done all of that work for them. So it's can be used for these mitigation credit agreements. It can also be used for you know, placing conservation in the most strategic way outside of the mitigation world. So that's one option as well.
And just to make clear that the RCIS is the first step, and then the mitigation credit agreements would be the second step afterwards. So the RCIS kind of inventories all of the different potential conservation actions that you could do. And then once you've identified what you would potentially need for your project, the RCIS will show you where potentially impacted habitat and species are located, and then what actions you could do as your mitigations. So then you could take that next step to develop your credit agreements using those conservation actions.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, so we have Scott, we have you up next. Okay, sorry. Oh, sorry, you were muted at the beginning of that.
Am I okay now?
You're okay now. Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit to the economics? So a credit equals what, for example? I mean, what I'm familiar with a mitigation is that a project would be required to mitigate to a ratio, and that's usually defined in terms of the land parcel. Could you speak a little bit more about what a credit is and how the values are determined?
I can give you as much information I have on that. That is still, I think the first mitigation credits are still in a pilot process. And so I don't know that any of the economics has been figured out quite yet. I think the mitigation ratios will likely be the same, the same or similar that is already required through the permitting process. I don't think that's going to change. Just that these credits could satisfy those mitigation requirements. But what that's going to cost, how, what that value of that is going to look like, I don't think that has been determined quite yet for anything. So that's something, as these mitigation credit agreements start to come online, to keep an eye on. Yeah. Okay, and I have one question here. Looks like they weren't able to get in the raise hand feature. And so the question was, how long will the CDFW public comment period be? And when do we expect that the RCIS will be live and ready to be implemented by TAMC? The CDFW public comment period is 30 days, I believe. And we'll let everybody know the second that becomes live. And then, or the public comment period becomes live. And then when do we expect the RCIS to be approved? We are hoping to get it approved by the end of this year, 2020. That is all kind of dependent on the review process through CDFW. And as Mike mentioned, there's a number of RCISs that are already in draft form. And so we'll be coming in at the end of that line, but I know that they're working really hard to start to be able to approve these. So we'll all send our love and support to CDFW so that we can get this approved by the end of the year. Okay, so next up we have Chad.
Hi, thanks. I mentioned this during one of our earlier meetings, maybe last year, about, I guess, the threats regarding mosquito abatement districts, especially in northern Monterey County. And I apologize, I haven't looked through all of the documentation that you've provided so far. I was just curious, I guess, if there is specific mention or discussion of this in the draft, and if not, is there room or time to add, not a lengthy discussion, but potentially some discussion on the threat and, leaving the door open for conservation actions to address this specifically, including things like, coordinating with them on specific ponds and what pesticides they're actually using in these specific ponds and not treating specific ponds, those sorts of things. Is it too late to kind of include that kind of information?
I'm glad you mentioned that. We do have a number of actions around, like different mosquito treatments and reduction of pollutants that are maybe currently used for that. I would, it's not too late to include those. So what I would do, Chad, is maybe take a look at some of our actions specifically around some of the amphibians where we discuss a lot of this, and let us know if you see other opportunities for us to kind of slip those in, because we do have some actions around that currently. Okay, so next we have Norm.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. I did enter a question into chat, but I think I misdirected it, so you can just delete it if you don't need it. My question relates to the 32 species that you identified and whether or not habitat restoration has to be key on those 32, or can habitat restoration specifically go after exotic and invasive species and the removal of those, such as thistles, sweet broom, or the pampas grass that we have on the coast here? Does it necessarily have to tie to those 32 species?
That is a really good question. Kind of the way that the RCIS program is set up is that the actions do need to be tied to our focal species or other conservation elements. So if we can tie these invasive species removal actions to them somehow, then they're going to be able to be counted, you know, under the RCIS. If you don't think that those connections can currently be made, I would say send me or Mike an email separately with some suggestions of how, what you see, like if we wanted to, you know, see if there's other ways that we can do it. I know that we have some regional actions that we've included that talk about reducing invasive species, because of course we recognize that that's one of the biggest threats to our focal species and our habitats. But if you don't think that that makes a good enough connection, then we can look for ways to revise the RCIS to include those actions as well.
Okay, that's good direction. Thank you, appreciate it.
Sure, no problem. Okay. I don't see any other hands raised at the moment, but maybe you'll all be inspired.
So I did receive a couple questions through the chat. The first one from John Olenek. Has there been discussion about if land use approving agencies in Monterey County will use the RCIS database to quality check the studies from consultants or applicants?
I'm gonna let you answer that one, Mike.
District-wide. Not specifically whether agency or land use approving agencies will be using this, but it would be available for them to use if they chose to do so. To see if there's a consistency between what a consultant or applicant is proposing in their study with different conservation actions that we've outlined in the RCIS.
Yeah, and I think one thing that is important that I'm not sure if we covered it in depth, but the RCIS is a non-binding strategy. So, you know, a local district wouldn't have to abide by it, but as Mike said, it's probably in the best interest to ensure consistency, you know, that what we're recommending, you know, is consistent with, you know, what folks are doing in their local districts.
And then received one more question from Rachel Saunders asking if the technical draft has been posted yet. And not yet. We hope to have that released before the end of this month for review, well before the August TMC board meeting. And we will send out notification to everybody once that's ready with a link to where you can access it on our website.
Yeah, and if you are waiting with bated breath for the draft, everything that's in there basically is already posted to our website. The RCIS draft will be a compilation of those deliverables with a section kind of about, you know, how we did it, and just kind of some other administrative stuff required from California Department of Fish and Wildlife, but all of the technical details are already available. Okay.
Okay, and one more note that I received. We did receive a question earlier about temporary conservation, easements, and Abigail Ramsden, if she's still with us, had sent a note saying that she could discuss a little bit about that Abigail looks like she's still here. Would we be able to unmute her and maybe she can provide some more insight on that?
Yeah, you're unmuted, Abby.
Great, thanks. So based on the experience that we've had in other RCISs under development, I believe the intention of the temporary credit is to match to temporary impacts. So this would be, for example, a construction project that included a staging area or some other kind of project-related impacts to natural resources that were not going to last for the duration of the project. We're not going to be considered perpetual in their impacts. And what the RCIS does is allow for agreements with public or private landowners for enhancements to land that are not protected permanently by a conservation easement to be used to offset temporary impacts. And the agreement to maintain the enhancements or improvements on the land must be at least as long, if not longer, than the projected impact of those temporary impacts. So there's a rough proportionality between them. And as Diana has pointed out, we haven't seen any MCAs yet, so I don't know if this is under development anywhere yet, but I think it's one of the innovations of the RCIS program and something that we're hoping to see demonstrated early on. And especially with an organization that has ongoing construction that includes these staging areas and other temporary project-related impacts, there's potentially lots of good chances to demonstrate this on the ground. This is one of those areas of the RCIS that is intended to be helpful for promoting conservation actions and enhancements, particularly on private lands with private landowners who might be wary for a whole variety of reasons of permanent conservation actions on their land. But this is a way for them to get some funding and benefit for beneficial actions on their private land that is then part of this credit scheme for compensatory mitigation for projects that have these kinds of impacts. And I'm happy, I mean, that's just a very general overview. I'm happy to work with the project team and potentially talk to stakeholders if it's relevant to see if there are any potential examples that we would want to think through together as a way to look ahead toward implementation and seeing how this kind of program could touch down in Monterey County.
Great, thank you.
Okay, not seeing any other hand raised or anything in the chat box right now. Just want to see if there's potentially any other questions that folks may have at this time. Okay, well, again, just want to thank everybody for participating in the meeting today. Hopefully this was informational for everybody. Like I mentioned, we will have the draft of the RCIS posted to the TMC website soon, and we'll be sending out notice of that when it's ready. And we will also have this video of the meeting posted to the website. And if there's any other questions or comments that you have after this meeting, you can always direct them to Regional Conservation Investment Strategy at tmcmonterey.org. That will send an email to the RCIS team, or you can just send them directly to myself or Diana Edwards, and our contact information is on the project webpage as well. So with that, I'll give them one last chance for any other questions. Okay, well, that gets us right before the 2:30 mark. So again, thank you, everybody. And keep an eye out for updates on the RCIS as we begin to move forward and kind of head towards hopefully getting this finalized by the end of the year. So thank you.